Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Australian Mental Health Prize presentation for 2021. My name is Lucy Brogden, and I'm joined today by my colleague and co-chair, Alan Fells. We are both on the advisory board for this prize, and we're very pleased to be able to facilitate today's presentation. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Guringai people, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that we are all gathered on many different lands today. We also like to pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us for the presentation. It's our pleasure to be able to host the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, David Coleman, who'll be announcing the winners shortly. The University of New South Wales, through the School of Psychiatry, has developed and facilitated this prize over the last 6 years. And we've had some great recipients and some great finalists. The commonality in the work of all of these finalists is their great desire to improve the lives of Australians living with mental illness and those that love and care for them. Recipients of the prize come from research, advocacy, treatment, carers, consumers, right across the spectrum and right across the country. As Australia, we emerge from 20 months that have been really tough for all of us. It used to be 1 in 5 Australians, we said, lived with mental illness. More recently, we're talking about 5 in 5 who've really found times tough. The work in the mental health sector has never been more important. And that's why this prize is so important, to recognise the deep contributions that people are making to make the lives of fellow Australians that much better. Today, we're going to hear from the university's Vice-Chancellor, we're going to hear from the Minister, and we're going to hear from another special guest, Professor Patrick McGorry. But now I'd like to introduce to you the University of New South Wales Vice-Chancellor, Ian Jacobs. Ian has really brought the heart to the motto of the University of New South Wales, Scienta, Cauda, Mente et Manu. As an alumna of the university, it is my pleasure to introduce Ian Jacobs. Thank you very much.
Hello friends. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands from which we gather, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I also acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us here today. I welcome the Honourable David Coleman, Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, and a UNSW alumnus. And I thank you for being part of the Australian Mental Health Prize for 2021. Over the past 6 years, this prize has celebrated a great many Australians who have dedicated their careers to promoting mental health or preventing and treating mental illness. Importantly, this prize also aims to raise public awareness of and normalise discussion about mental health. These past 2 years have seen many people in Australia experiencing mental illness or ill health for the first time. The pandemic has demonstrated how vital it is that we put an end to any stigma and shame about mental health. A new light has been shone on a topic that should never have been in the shadows. At UNSW, we're taking a whole of university approach to mental health welfare, with the support programs available for our students and our staff. Our new student mental health strategy brings health counselling and psychology services into one team, and our Mental Health Connect intake service makes sure that students have timely access to help when they need it most. We've also ramped up mental health first aid training so that there are more and more people throughout the UNSW community who have the knowledge and confidence to offer assistance when and where it's needed. And of course, as a university, we have an abiding commitment to mental health through teaching and research, supported through our School of Psychiatry, Australia's preeminent psychiatric department, and the founders of the prize we are celebrating today. Our vision at UNSW is to improve lives, a goal that is exemplified in the work of this year's finalists and the many people who have been recognised since 2016. I've been fortunate during my time at UNSW to witness the evolution of the Australian Mental Health Prize and to learn about some of the wonderful work mental health professionals are doing right across Australia. Congratulations to all our finalists. Your work is invaluable. So now I am very pleased to welcome you for my final time as President and Vice-Chancellor of UNSW Sydney to the Australian Mental Health Prize for 2021.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, and we wish you well for the future. The University of New South Wales's continued commitment to recognising advocates through its strong support of the Australian Mental Health Prize over the last 6 years is greatly appreciated, and I know that many people in the field look to this prize in terms of the recognition that it provides. Our next speaker today is the Honourable David Coleman. As I said, the Minister assisting the Prime Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention. The Minister has been in this role for about a year now, and wow, what a workload he's picked up in that time. Minister Coleman has a long and deep interest in the mental health sector, but in the last 12 months, he's really been engaged in a lot of the work that we're doing right across the country, working with the many jurisdictions that the mental health sector has to manage. And so now it is our pleasure to be able to welcome Minister Coleman. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Lucy, and great to be with you and great to be with everyone for the presentation of this really important prize today, because the Australian Mental Health Prize plays a key role in mental health in Australia. And as Lucy said, for 6 years now, it's celebrated the work of individuals striving in this field to improve the mental health landscape in our country. And it does this from all angles, looking beyond just academia to recognise the work of carers, of advocates, of innovators, and everyone, importantly, with lived experience. The prize's efforts to embrace these voices, to celebrate and showcase their achievements, is one of its great strengths. And I'd in particular like to acknowledge the continued commitment of UNSW Medicine and Health in this area. And as an alumni of UNSW myself, it's particularly good to be joining for this important presentation today. And the event today does recognise and appreciate the important and groundbreaking work that so many Australians are doing in the area of mental health and suicide prevention. It's also another step in the important journey we're all on, helping to reduce stigma and raise awareness of mental health right across the nation. And the prize has had some very eminent winners since it began. I won't single out any one of them. We know them all as outstanding Australians with a special interest in mental health and suicide prevention. And this year's finalists are no less impressive. Mental health and suicide prevention are at the top of the Australian government's priorities. Almost 4 million Australians suffer some form of chronic or episodic mental illness each year. Mental ill health affects almost all Australians, either directly or indirectly, in our workplaces, our schools, and our homes. And we all know that the unrelenting pandemic has left many Australians vulnerable and led to unprecedented demand for mental health services. Australia was one of the first countries in the world to recognise the mental health impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and develop a specific national mental health and wellbeing pandemic response plan, which we announced back in May of last year. Since March of 2020, the Australian government has made available more than $1 billion in funding to respond to the mental health impacts of the pandemic, including a significant investment in mental health supports via telehealth. Our support and funding for mental health and suicide prevention is unprecedented. In this year's budget, the government invested a record $2.3 billion in the National Mental Health and Suicide Prevention Plan to lead landmark reform of the mental health system and ensure Australia's recovery from the pandemic continues. This takes mental health funding to an estimated $6.5 billion in 2021-22, close to double that of 2012-13. We're also investing in additional mental health services no matter who you are, what your circumstances, or where you live in Australia. And this importantly includes $820 million to establish a national network of adult, child and youth mental health treatment centres. Operating under a no wrong door approach, these new services will ensure the delivery of easy to access, high quality, person-centred treatment and supports across the mental health care system in our cities, our regions, our rural areas, providing stigma-free and compassionate care. Now, the government knows that prevention and early intervention, both early in life and in the development of a condition, will minimise the impact of mental illness across a person's lifetime. And that's why the National Children's Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy, which we launched last month, is so important. A world first, the strategy gives us a framework for preventing mental illness and reducing its impact on children, families and the community, and will certainly guide and inform the Australian Government's investment and commitment to the health and wellbeing of our children and young people. The 2021-22 budget includes more than $317 million for a number of initiatives focused on the mental health and wellbeing of kids aged up to 12 and their parents, many of which are specific priorities outlined in the Child Mental Health and Wellbeing Strategy. They include the largest single expansion of the Headspace network, new Head to Health Kids Centres, parenting, carer and perinatal support, Backing Kids Helpline, and a national study on child mental health and wellbeing. Building a skilled mental health workforce, of course, is critical, and the government is committed to expanding, strengthening and upskilling the mental health workforce to deliver services to those who need them. Our 10-year National Mental Health Workforce Strategy will consider the quality, supply, distribution and structure of the workforce. It will provide insights on the workforce required to meet the current and future demands of the mental health system, and it will identify practical approaches to be implemented by Australian governments. The strategy is currently being finalised following broad public consultation, and meanwhile, we continue to provide funding to strengthen the mental health workforce. This includes some $59 million to attract, train and retain skilled workers. Importantly, $15.9 million to support GPs in providing primary mental health care, and $2.6 million to support the mental health of the health workforce. And I'm confident that by continuing to work together, governments, the sector, people with lived experience, and of course, people of the quality and commitment we are celebrating today, we can build a world-class mental health system for modern Australia. A connected, person-centred system supported by a highly skilled workforce that ensures all Australians have access to high-quality, affordable mental health care where and when they need it. It's great to be here for this really important award presentation today, and thank you very much and congratulations in advance to everyone who's been nominated for today's award. Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Minister. Really a whole raft of achievements. And those of you that may have participated in the launch of this year's prize might remember former recipient Professor Helen Milroy really making a very strong case for the need for a children's strategy. And it was really quite a significant achievement just back in October when we were able to launch that strategy through the National Mental Health Commission, but with input from people right across the sector. And I think it really shows the power of our sector to reach out and engage with parents, consumers, carers, scientists, practitioners, and really bring this all together into a significant achievement. It's now my pleasure to be able to introduce another friend and colleague in Patrick McGorry. Pat McGorry has worked as a scientist, as a practitioner, as an advocate, as a reformer in the mental health sector for many, many years, and really won too many awards to be able to list today. But most significantly, he was our Australian of the Year in 2010. More recently, Pat was chaired the Expert Advisory Group on the Victorian Royal Commission into Mental Health Services, and it's on that topic that Pat is our guest speaker today, and we very much look forward to hearing from Pat. Welcome to you, Pat.
Well, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Lucy, and thank you for the introduction, and good morning, Minister. I just want to start off by saying what an enormous privilege it has been to be part of the Australian Mental Health Prize, and particularly to see so many amazing candidates and nominations, and the finalists, of course, are all incredibly impressive people, and it's a very tough task to select the winners. I know several of them personally and know exactly what their contributions have been, so it's very inspiring to be here today with you all. Now, I've worked in mental health for a long time, and I've seen this constant tension between, are we at a tipping point or is it just another mirage? I'm hoping it's the tipping point. And of course, in Australia, we should be very proud of the innovations and the progress that the pioneers of mental health reform have actually engineered, designed and tested, and with the power of lived experience behind them or with them, we have made a difference. We've got oases in what is to some extent still a bit of a desert, and I really hope we can green the desert in the next period. Of course, this period now that we're in is critical because it's the recovery phase now from the pandemic, and that's what I want to focus on today. The world situation for mental health care is grim. There's been no progress really around the world in the last 10 years, as this Lancet Commission really showed. It's a public health disgrace, really, when you look at it, when you look at the suffering and premature death that occurs, and we in Australia have got a huge responsibility now to do something about it. We've been going through about 50 different plans. That we're about to have the 6th National Mental Health Plan, the National Agreement, but is it going to be any different from any of the others? That's the big question. Is it going to take us to a whole new level, or is it just going to be more fiddling at the margins? And we are at a fork in the road, and we should really take it. This was the first plan, and I feel like I've been like this man, waiting ever since for one of the same sort of boldness and scale. At the same time, we've been having awareness and stigma reduction. We've been having our public mental health systems falling apart, and we haven't been listened to until very recently on that front. We've been just told to go away. But now in Victoria in particular, and also nationally, we're seeing a lot more interest in investing in mental health care, but will it be of the order of magnitude that we need? Victoria was a particularly sad case. It had been quite progressive in the late 1990s, but it gradually fell apart over the succeeding couple of decades, and that culminated in the Victorian Royal Commission, which was the most inspiring experience I've had in public mental health in my career, because it actually came up with a serious blueprint which is now being heavily invested in by the Victorian government, although under very difficult conditions now. Productivity Commission was also positive in terms of nailing the underspend, at the scale of the underspend, 10 billion for a 5 million people problem, compared with the NDIS with 500,000 people and 28 billion. So massive, massive underspend with huge consequences for the economy and the society. And now we are rebuilding from, what feels like the ruins of the public mental health system in most states. Certainly it has felt like that in our state, under huge duress in recent years. But the conditions are not particularly good for the rebuild. And that leads me now to focus on the pandemic and its impact on mental health around the country. There seem to be 3 major effects. One is the effect on our well-being and public morale, and a lot of the government policies in the early stage, which a few countries did actually focus on mental health, so we should derive some credit for this. We did focus on the public morale and with things like mental health promotion messages like connectedness and the like, but clearly inadequate for tackling the surge in new cases and new incidents, which I'll get to in a minute. 2 types of new cases: one, relapses of existing mental ill health, and the second, obviously, a big surge of new cases of mental ill health, especially in women and especially in young people. And this led to the Economist magazine originally coining the term the shadow pandemic, which obviously I have spoken about a lot in Australia, and we've had resonance with the government, including the Treasurer, on this point. So I think it captures a real phenomenon, the shadow pandemic. We predicted this, our work at Origin modelling this, we predicted around about a 30% increase in need for care, which in Victoria amounts to 82,000 more young people needing help, and across the whole lifespan, 370,000. Now, whether we quite reach that point, but we're pretty close, as you'll see in a minute. So that was the modelling. And Ian Hickie, one of the finalists here, and his group in Sydney modelled suicide prediction, which, and it wasn't the immediate effect, it's more like the delayed effect, I think, that they were focusing on. And they also have acknowledged that the government's policies, economic policies with JobKeeper and the like, did actually mitigate this across most parts of the lifespan, but not so much in young people. There has not been a drop in youth suicide. And in fact, in some sections of the youth age span, there's been an increase. So that's a worry, but at least we didn't see these sorts of increases that Ian's group predicted, not yet anyway, and fingers crossed that won't occur. If we look at the increase, I won't go to the actual figures here, but there's been a significant increase across all domains, the whole full spectrum of mental ill health. A reduction in the percentage of people who have got no symptoms, an increase in mild symptoms, and particularly in moderate and severe symptoms, a very significant, I think it's about a 25% increase overall in the more severe forms, moderate to severe. So this is real. We've just seen this appear now from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. I won't go through it all, but you can see that there's been a significant increase in indirect health effects. And it's not just mental health, by the way, it's cancer and other non-communicable diseases which have been delayed, and we will see downstream effects there too. But in mental health, we've seen an immediate effect, a surge, which will continue for a long period to come. The AIHW highlight the impact on young people once again, and there are many reasons for this, which this slide map out. You don't really have to think about it for long to see why young people are bearing the real burden of this pandemic from a mental health point of view, in terms of their stage in life and what's actually been happening to them. This was captured in surveys like this large Headspace survey, where 3/4 of young people basically stated their mental health was worse. And we've seen it also in hard numbers, which is really the only way they can actually present with a system that's completely blocked in terms of access in emergency departments, and particularly related to lockdowns in the lockdown states, but also a phenomenon occurring across the country. The Lancet published a paper earlier this month showing that there's been a significant increase in anxiety and depression around the world, around about 25 to 28% increase in anxiety and depression as a result of the pandemic. That's just in 2020. So we can assume that it's significantly more, particularly in lockdown areas of Australia in 2021. So these are some of the facts. I haven't got time to go into all the details here, but it's the shadow pandemic. And the responses have been, as I say, mental health promotional in some ways, and also in sandbagging, what I call sandbagging, by supporting helplines like Beyond Blue and Lifeline, which is obviously very, very important to do. But behind the sandbags, clearly we haven't had a significant enough response. It's been very difficult to mount that because of other issues like workforce. But telehealth was a positive. It did actually keep the channels open, but there's certainly been a reduced access to care during the pandemic. It's been maintained in a better way than it would have been in other periods, but still a serious issue. Now, here's some analysis of these facts. The increase in prevalence of common mental disorders, anxiety and depression, is about half of, or less than half of what it is worldwide in Australia. So this suggests that Australia is paying a relatively lower price for infection control in terms of population mental ill health than has been seen elsewhere. And that's probably because we didn't experience such a terrible toll and impact of the actual virus itself. So that government policies have been positive in that respect. They've protected mental health, even though it has been sacrificed in other ways with lockdowns and other restrictions. The estimate of burden of disease, you can see it there. If we think about other disorders that aren't captured by that Lancet paper, we can estimate the cost in DALYs, disability adjusted life years, of increased mental disorder in Australia in 2020, and I emphasise that's merely for 2020, is about 35,000 DALYs. The estimate for COVID itself is only 8,400 DALYs. So mental health impact is much greater than the direct COVID impact in terms of burden of disease. But, you know, as I say, if the epidemic had been as dramatic as that was in some other countries or many other countries, we would have had a more significant impact, of course. So ignoring issues of equity, Australia's policy responses overall both caused more mental disorders and reduced COVID incidence. So there's a case to be made that the price paid in increased mental disorders is much less than the gain in averted COVID cases. The choice to sacrifice population mental health for reduced respiratory disease was painful, but it was correct. That doesn't necessarily mean it's an appropriate template for the changed context in which we now find ourselves, with 90% plus population at least single vaxxed and soon to be double vaxxed. So this is a very different scenario, and that's what we need to focus on now, not what's happened so far. On the grounds of equity as well as efficiency and public health, a response is required to mitigate the 35k excess DALYs due to increased mental disorders, because this is going to continue for some time. And we also need to consider the delayed morbidity and mortality for mental health and other non-communicable diseases likely to COVID-19. We need new modelling, and it needs to address a number of questions, which are pretty obvious, really, and that is not necessarily being pursued strongly enough. In the Medical Journal of Australia, Stephen Duckett and Brett Sutton, in their review of entering this recovery phase, stress mental health as a key focus for recovery, a key pillar for rebuilding, and they emphasise that this long tail of COVID, we talk about long COVID, well, the mental health impacts of this pandemic are going to be very long and significant. And some of the key issues, just to get towards the end, the system was not coping even prior to the pandemic, and it's never been addressed in terms of scale. And we've seen lots of positive things around the edges, but nothing really definitive. Victorian Royal Commission does provide a definitive blueprint, and we've just got to see if that actually gets taken up more widely. Wait times are exploding. Everyone knows that. It's almost impossible to get to see someone within a period of a few weeks or even a few months at the moment, except through emergency departments and GPs. And ironically, extending the number of sessions has made access at the front end even more difficult. Not that it's not a good thing. The workforce is shrinking, depleted and exhausted. And there doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency about that. And we just compare the response and the dynamic and agile responses to the pandemic itself with the kind of more casual approach to responding to the mental health shadow pandemic. If we don't have an emergency plan for things like workforce, then things are going to get worse before they get better. And even one of the things I've noticed is even when governments, and to their credit, they have actually made some very significant announcements, they don't get executed. The money just sits in bank accounts or in PHNs or in health departments or networks and doesn't actually, the rubber does not hit the road. And that's, something's got to be done about that. That is just completely unacceptable with thousands of, tens of thousands of people on waiting lists. So I think, just in conclusion, we need to recognise mental health as the key pillar for recovery from mental wealth. It's much, in my opinion, and I went through that period when the NDIS was formulated and rolled out. This is a more important and more crucial policy reform than the NDIS was. Not to detract in any way from the value of the NDIS, but this is a much larger and more serious health and social issue. which has been neglected in every single country. There's a return on investment and mental wealth here. The only way this is going to happen is if the public mobilise themselves in their own self-interest. And one of the strategies for that is Australians for Mental Health, which many of you will know about. We need to create a massive wind beneath the wings of the sympathetic politicians like the Minister who's here today, the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, and on the opposition side too, we have Mark Butler, who was the architect of significant reforms about 10 years ago. So these people want to lead, but if they don't see the public affected in such a serious way, demanding and insisting and supporting these policy reforms, they just won't happen at the scale that they need to. We also need to unite as a mental health field, and I'm sure all the finalists here agree with this because they've all played key roles in this respect. Behind agreed solutions, we have the blueprints, we know what needs to be done, and we've just got to execute. And the missing middle is the key group to be focusing on. The Victorian blueprint is the best I've seen so far, but there are probably other content issues that could be added in there too. And as you all know, workforce is by far the #1 priority. Even when we have the money and the plan, we can't execute if we don't have the skilled, compassionate and well-trained workforce working alongside people with lived experience. So if we're going to rebuild, and as a key pillar of the recovery post-COVID, we have to mobilise. And many of the people involved in today's finalists have been doing that in a very successful and inspiring way. So hope to see a lot more of that in the coming months with the support of both sides of politics. Thanks very much for listening.
Good morning, all. Good morning, Minister, and the many here. I'm Alan Fells, co-chair with Lucy. And I want to first of all thank Pat for his discussions on this complex issue and the tremendous insight and relevance to the contemporary situation that he brings in this and all his discussions in this field. Now, turning to the prize, 6 outstanding finalists have been selected this year. I'm amazed and impressed by their work and compassion, as well as by the diversity of their impact on the mental health field. The best voices to share their work is that of our finalists themselves. And so I'd like to invite you to watch this video of our 6 finalists as they demonstrate their passion and their expertise in mental health.
Hello, my name is John Barr. I'm one of the co-founders of Soldier On and Fortum Australia, 2 organisations that support veterans and first responders in helping them with their mental health, connecting to community, and eventually to transition into employment post their career. We also, of course, support their families, who are a critical aspect of anyone's mental health journey. It's a real delight to be included in such esteemed company inside this year's 2021 Australian Mental Health Prize. The work that all of the other finalists have done is just incredible, and it's just a really humbling experience. The work we have done for veterans and first responders has been something that has been a real purpose and a real mission, being a veteran myself and seeing so many first responders suffer recently through the Black Summer fires, through the pandemic, and recognising that we as a community have an opportunity to support them and their mental health as much as the organisations in which they are employed. And I hope that being a finalist, and I've already seen some evidence to this, will help to highlight the issues that our first responders and our veterans face every single day, and the mental toll that this can take on them and their families. So again, absolutely delighted to be a finalist, and I wish everyone success in the work that they have done, which has allowed them to be a finalist, and will continue to do to make our society better.
My name's Eastley, and I started my work in mental health by having many breakdowns over many years, and then starting to write about them because they were really one of the most profound, but also equal parts confusing and lonely experiences of my life. And my work for the past decade has really been about trying to change that for other folks. So I ended up making a podcast with the ABC called No Feeling is Final, which is about my own experiences of chronic suicidality, but really it's like a raw look at the messiness that is trying to navigate the mental health system and what it does to a person. It ended up winning a bunch of awards and got named a top podcast by New York Times, The Atlantic, something I'm really, to this day, still very proud of making. So I ended up going on to co-found the Big Feels Club with my partner, Graham Panther. We've had, since 2018, 1 million downloads of our podcasts and articles, and over 6,000 members, all folks who've been in that similar kind of confusing, lonely, working it out space. The last couple of years, I've really had the privilege to work on the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system. Again, really keen on how do we get people with lived experience at the core of how the system works so that it's working well. In terms of this award, I was totally shocked and really proud to be named as a finalist, because I see this as a vote of confidence for folks like myself and for peer-led initiatives that don't get as much airtime as other things might. And while I've got a lot of, probably thousands at this stage, emails in my inbox from folks who are saying, keep doing what you're doing, you know, this is still really emergent, the kind of work that I and other people like me do. And so being named for something like this is, you know, I hope that institutions, governments, you know, see this and they know that they need to start really valuing lived experience as a core part of how we make a system to help folks.
Hello everyone, I'm Helen Hermann. I'm pleased to be speaking to you today in these circumstances from Melbourne. So I'm greatly honoured to be a finalist in the Australian Mental Health Prize. I began working in mental health as a public health doctor, and I trained as a psychiatrist later on. But this background has had a continuing influence. And in terms of thinking about the mental health work, this has led me to pay particular attention in the time ever since to the social aspects of mental health work. And in particular, the need to join forces with people with lived experience and their families, and our fellow professionals working in social services and other sectors of the community, including education and social justice. In the early years of the national mental health reform in the 1990s, I had the opportunity to contribute to the development of an area mental health service in central Melbourne, and to do this from the base of an academic department of psychiatry at St Vincent's Health Service in Melbourne. We had some wonderful colleagues doing that in the area that we worked in. And we were aspiring then to develop a collaborative community-based care for people living with mental illnesses that was accessible to people who had living in the most vulnerable circumstances under adversity, including young people who were not in education or employment, homeless people, and those with drug and alcohol-related problems. And it's important to see that these aspirations are surviving and flourishing with the work of the National Mental Health Commission and a number of vibrant state-based reforms as we have in Victoria at present. So over the years, I've worked internationally as well as locally, working with the World Health Organization and the World Psychiatric Association. But the work in these settings I found has always been inspired by the experiences here. And in turn, it's reinforced my understanding of how important it is to work together across health and social services and education. along with people with lived experience in their families, as well as the need to draw attention to the influence of poverty, gender discrimination, violence on people's mental health. So being listed as a finalist in this prestigious prize is a great honour, as well as an inspiration to continue work with others, like my fellow finalists and all associated with this prize.
Hi. I must say that I'm deeply honoured, indeed flattered, to be nominated for the University of New South Wales Australian Mental Health Prize. As a graduate of the University of New South Wales Medical School, I've always had deep affection for its work and its leadership, particularly in the fields of mental health. Often my kids ask me, Dad, what have you really done? You seem to talk about the same things you've talked about for the last 30 years. Has there really been progress? Have you really achieved anything? I often say, personally, not much. But I've been really lucky to be parts of teams of people who have strived to make a real difference to Australian mental health, and particularly to the lives of those individuals and their families who've been affected by mental ill health, as well as the wider mental health and well-being of our country. I'm very lucky to be coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we still have so much to learn about growing the social and emotional well-being, indeed the mental wealth of our whole country. I've been so lucky to be part of teams at the University of New South Wales Mood Disorders Unit, which preceded the Black Dog Institute, with Gordon Parker and Henry Bradati, leaders in the area, Gavin Andrews and Neil McConaughey and many others. I was then very lucky to work at St George with Margaret Tobin in trying to improve mental health services and the establishment of the Academic Department of Psychiatry at St George. I was really fortunate to work with a great team at Beyond Blue in Melbourne in the establishment of that organisation, and subsequently with the establishment of the Brain and Mind Centre at the University of Sydney, a truly multidisciplinary enterprise, something that tries to combine contemporary society, issues of real impact, and mental health research to improve the lives of those most affected. Throughout my career, also other great teams, particularly in the establishment of Headspace with Pat McGorry and his colleagues at Origin Youth Health in Melbourne, and internationally with my colleagues in the United States, the United Kingdom, Colombia, and elsewhere in the developing world. I've been thrilled to be at a time when neuroscience has made a difference, when new technologies are now available, and when, of course, most importantly, community understanding has really gone forward. So in this particular recognition, I'd see the recognition not much of what I've personally done, but actually those great teams that have struggled and strived to make a difference, teams that have been prepared to go out and set the agenda, and actually then to advocate for that agenda and indeed try to produce evidence that it does make a genuine difference in people's lives. I think it is so important to recognise the many people, and many of them, again, finalists in this award this year and also winners in the past, that in mental health we have many great people, we have many great organisations, we are striving to make a difference. Since I started my career as a psychiatrist, many great things have happened. Movement to involvement of the community awareness, focus on early intervention, birth of neuroscience and new technologies, the use of current new technologies to potentially deliver much more personalised and better health services. The reality is we still have a long way to go. It's important to recognise our achievements along the way, and personally being recognised is always very flattering. However, it's the teams and the people I've been most influenced by have been those people who have had personal experience of mental ill health and their families, from which I have learned a great deal. When I was young, it was particularly with older people with mental health problems. As I've got older, it's increasingly young people. I still have so much more to learn. The teams that I'm part of have so much more to learn as well, in partnership with the wider community. And we hope to continue to strive to set an agenda for real change and improvement of the lives of our whole community, but mostly those who are directly affected by mental ill health and their families. Thank you very much for this personal nomination.
Hello everyone, I'm Claire Spencer. I'm the Chief Executive of Arts Centre Melbourne, and it is such an honour to receive this nomination, particularly at the moment. The live performance sector has been one of the hardest hit industries by the coronavirus, and it will be some time before we can even begin on our road to recovery. The mental health and well-being of our people at Arts Centre Melbourne, but also of all of those people who work in the live performance industry, is at the heart of the Arts Wellbeing Collective. Mental health is a complex issue at the best of times for our sector, and never more so than now. I believe it's the responsibility of every leader not only to prioritise the mental health and well-being of their teams, but also to interrogate the systems, the processes, the structures, the cultures that make up their organisations and their industry, so we can create environments across every sector where people can do their best work and can live their healthiest and wellest lives. So I'm really thrilled to be nominated for the Australian Mental Health Prize. Thank you so much.
I remember one of the first events I attended when I entered into this sector 10 years ago as a 24-year-old with a background in economics and finance. And I stormed up to Sam Mostyn, who was one of the newly appointed commissioners, saying, where are the young people? Where are the young people voices and stories that can help frame this sector in a positive manner? And she listened. The commissioner listened, and together we worked on a project to hear young people and help support their work. The foundations of where Batyr came have been built off the power of the lived experience. My own experience was the foundation, but from that we've now had over 1,000 young people through the Being Heard program learning how to share their stories safely, to help others in need, to hear about hope and recovery and resilience from a young person to a young person. The work we've done in the past 10 years has been incredible, and I'm honoured to be a part of it, and for that work to be recognised here today. But I also recognise the incredible work that's been done before me. The amazing individuals, many of whom we've lost along the way, but the power of the lived experiences helping to frame this sector is fundamental. But also the leaders that are listening to those stories, willing to drive sector reform. And the challenge is we still need it. It is still confusing for a person entering into a service about where to go, how to get there, and how to get in, and how long's that wait time, and how much does that cost. It's unfortunate that the work is not yet done, but I'm optimistic about where it's going. And I think the power of these incredible young people coming through that I get to hear, and many of you get to hear on a day-to-day basis, can help shape the future of this sector. And I'm positive that if I do win this tonight, that I wanted to do something a bit different, or today, something a bit different, which is follow one of the true Australian icons, Daniel Ricciardo, that if I do come the podium finish, that I promise to do a shoey with the award. I've got my local shoe on here, so it's going to be very clean. But again, I just want to say a massive thank you for being recognised for the work for myself, but also more broadly for Batyr. And I look forward to working with many of you in the sector as we look to change the way mental health impacts our whole community.
The breadth of this year's finalists demonstrates the diverse and deeply compassionate work being undertaken in many challenging areas, improving the care of veterans and first responders with mental illness, reducing the stigma of mental health in young people, promoting positive mental health in the performing arts industry, leading and advocating at a national and international level, and embracing the power of digital media to amplify stories of lived experience. I want to congratulate all the 2021 finalists for their selection this year. I'd now like to welcome back the Minister to announce the winner of the 2021 Australian Mental Health Prize. Minister.
Thanks very much, Alan. And it gives me immense pleasure to be able to announce that there are two winners for the prize in 2021. The first winner of the Australian Mental Health Prize is Honor Eastley. Honor is an Australian writer, podcaster, and mental health advocate for a stronger consumer voice. Her podcast, No Feeling is Final, has been downloaded over 500,000 times, and she co-founded the Big Feels Club, an online community with more than 6,000 members, changing the way Australians talk about emotional distress and crisis. She was also a senior advisor to the Royal Commission into the Victorian mental health system, and then part of their expert advisory committee. The second winner of the Australian Mental Health Prize is Professor Ian Hickie AM. Ian is an internationally renowned researcher in depression, early intervention, and youth mental health. He was founding CEO of Beyond Blue and helped create Headspace and the Young and Well Cooperative Research Centre. He was also an inaugural commissioner on Australia's National Mental Health Commission, overseeing enhanced accountability for mental health reform and suicide prevention. Congratulations to both of our winners, and I'd now like to welcome Honor to accept her prize.
Firstly, I want to thank the University of New South Wales and, of course, the Prize Advisory Board for selecting me as a co-winner of this prize. My partner, Graham, can attest that I was in something of a state of shock to hear that I had won it. And that's because, you know, there is a formidable group of finalists this year. All people who have gone above and beyond to do some really impactful work in the mental health space. So, you know, thank you to all those people for their work. I just want to quickly thank 3 lived experience leaders in my life who have been very integral to all of the work that I've done over the past number of years. Heather Pickard, Gareth Edwards, a close friend who has believed in me more than I think I have, and my partner, Graham Panther, who co-wrote the No Feelings Final podcast and who also has lovingly stewarded the Big Feels Club over the years. I really wouldn't have had the courage to do these things without Graham, but without all 3 of those folks. And I also want to acknowledge the many, many decades of activism by people with lived experience. Because I wouldn't have gotten this award without all of the work that those people have done. And many of them are people that I've had the absolute luxury to work alongside, and I wouldn't have been able to do the work I have without them. I've had a very, I would say, non-linear and unusual journey in my work with mental health. I think probably the first sort of thing that kind of led me down this path that I did was I recorded a video of myself in psych hospital, and I put it up on the internet, and because I was just trying to make sense of what was happening to me. So I say that just to say that when I started out down this path, I was much more concerned that I would have rendered myself unemployable rather than winning a national prize. So this is really quite something. And I want to say the reason that back then when I started writing about my experiences on the internet from hospital is that I was in this place where I wanted to speak to this experience where you can even be in the place that you're supposed to be to get help and be doing all of the things that you're supposed to be, and it can still be a profoundly lonely and confusing experience. But it doesn't actually have to be. Some of the most profoundly helpful things for me have been finding other people that have gone through the same stuff. It just took about 10 years of using the mental health system to find that. And that's why we made the Big Feels Club, which is an online peer support community. And it's why I continue to advocate for peer support and things kind of adjacent to that, like peer respite, warm lines, alternatives to emergency departments, all things that we know work and that are just really crying out for more investment to make them viable. So I really don't see this as an award for myself or my work in particular, but more a vote of confidence for other people out there leading from having been through these experiences themselves, the kind of people who don't often get credit for the huge amounts of work that they're doing. So thank you again to the advisory board for selecting me, and I hope that other folks out there feel like they can keep going with the important work that they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Honor, and congratulations once again. I'd now like to welcome our second winner, Professor Ian Hickie, AM, to accept his prize.
I must say what a great honour and privilege it is to be a co-winner of the Australian Mental Health Prize. Like many Australians, I'm so fortunate to be coming to you from the lands of the Indigenous people, in my case, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where I live and work and continue to thrive with my family and those who are close to me. We still have so much to learn from the original owners of this land, particularly around the social and emotional well-being of our nation. It's a great thrill to share this prize with Honour Eastley. Throughout my whole life as a psychiatrist, the partnerships with those with lived experience, those with direct experience of mental ill health and their families has been central to the work of all the organisations that I've been part of. I'm also incredibly grateful to the opportunities I've had through the University of New South Wales, who support the Australian Mental Health Prize. First as a medical student, when my dad was actually a foundation professor of medicine. I'm deeply attached to that place, but also to the School of Psychiatry and their support through my professional training and my postgraduate qualifications. That led by Gordon Parker and Gavin Andrews and many others, Henry Bradati over a long period. That's where I formed many ideas that I have about how important an empirical basis to what we do in combination with personal connection really matters. I'm also incredibly grateful to the people I've worked with, the organisations. Individual prizes never really recognise we rather than me. I've been so fortunate with the School of Psychiatry, people I've worked with, the area health services, people like Margaret Tobin, no longer with us sadly, those with Beyond Blue, those through Headspace, and now with the Youth Mental Health and Technology team at the Brain and Mind Centre, where particularly my partner, Dr. Elizabeth Scott, does all the clinical work while I do most of the talking. And the young people and the inspiring people I work with there continue to drive forward an agenda for change in mental health in Australia. We've come such a long way in terms of awareness, but we have such a long way to go in terms of fundamental structural change and reform. And much of my life talking with the community more widely and with Australians more broadly, Australia leads the world in understanding and an empathy and a connection with people with these problems. But we face the same structural problems and difficulties that many others have. Despite my age, I'm incredibly enthusiastic about change and the tools that we now have through technology, through partnerships, through innovation, through neurosciences, through the connection with social sciences. Some of the most important projects that I'm tied up with at the moment are anthropological, they're cultural, they're about social change, they're about economics. I'm grateful to Professor Alan Fells for my continuing education in that particular field. So lucky to have those opportunities in terms of going forward. And so I hope this prize continues to recognise not only the professionals who've contributed in the area like myself, most importantly, those directly affected and their families, but also the wider Australian community, and engages and continues to do that. So on behalf of us, who's really recognised through these particular awards rather than me, I hope that we're able to continue to take forward that which is so important to the growing mental wealth of this country, the social and emotional resources on the lands in which we live, and that we continue to incorporate the great learnings from the Indigenous people of these countries so that we all end up focusing on the greater social and emotional well-being of this great nation.
Thank you, Minister David Coleman, for presenting this very important award to our deserving winners, Honour Eastley and Professor Ian Hickie. And I want to congratulate both Honour and Ian. I'm really thrilled to see both of you, your accomplishments recognised with this prestigious award. Honour, your innovative use of new media to reach a broad audience and continued advocacy to transform the language and approach used for those with big feelings has touched and changed many lives. And you also did a great job assisting the Victorian Royal Commission. Ian, your contribution to mental health in Australia over many years can't be overestimated. Thank you for all that you have done and continue to do in research and advocacy for patients and carers. To all of our finalists and all of our nominees, you are appreciated. Please keep doing all the things that you have been doing. Thank you to all of those who have nominated people for the finalist positions. Thank you for identifying, seeing and appreciating our nominees and for taking the time to recommend them as great candidates for this year's Australian Mental Health Prize. And then thank you for all who've been involved in producing the Australian Mental Health Prize. An event such as this requires a great deal of work behind the scenes and much commitment. I'd especially like to thank my fellow members of the Advisory Committee. Your continued commitment to recognising and celebrating the essential area of mental health is much appreciated. I want to also thank the School of Psychiatry and the University of New South Wales DEE team for their hard work in producing this prize, especially the technical team for keeping this event running so smoothly. So thank you all for joining us this morning. We've heard from some truly outstanding individuals taking great strides to create better mental health for Australians. I hope you are as inspired and moved as I am by this morning's event. And I wish you all good mental health. Thank you.